Sign it, Elena. Leave my life with some dignity. Ryan, please, don't do this. Some dignity. Elena Tan had spent 3 years being called Ryan Chow's invisible wife, the CEO that everyone in Singapore feared crossing. That night, in the glittering lobby of the Orchard Crown Singapore, she wasn't invited to a party but shoved into a public sentencing. Isabel Pereira, the woman smiling beside her husband, placed the divorce papers on a marble table as if serving a bitter dessert. What no one imagined was that before Elena lost the name wife, the entire hotel would have to kneel before the name she hid. The lobby of the Orchard Crown Singapore seemed designed so that no one would ever cry there. The gleam of the heavy marble reflected crystal chandeliers, arrangements of white orchids, and expensive suits moving through the night with controlled haste near the reception. A pianist played too softly to cover the sound of luggage wheels, of high heels, and of whispers from guests pretending not to look. Elena Tan sat in a blue velvet armchair, her cold hands on a simple handbag that clashed with everything in that setting. Before her, on the low table, was an open black folder, 2 copies of a divorce agreement, and a gold pen positioned with almost ceremonial cruelty. Isabel Pereira stood beside the papers, flawless in a champagne-colored dress, with the smile of someone who was finally taking a seat she had always believed she deserved. Ryan Chow, Elena's husband, stood beside her, handsome, rigid, distant, as if all the love he had once promised had been filed away in some inaccessible room of his own soul. Isabel tilted her head and spoke in a tone low enough to seem elegant, but loud enough for the receptionist to hear. "Let's not turn this into a scandal, Elena. You've always been discreet. Stay that way now." The sentence was polished like a fine glass and sharp as a broken shard. Elena looked at the papers without touching them. She saw her name printed next to Ryan's, saw the cold terms, saw the word dissolution, as if 3 years of marriage were just sugar melted in coffee on the other side of the counter. 2 receptionists exchanged a look that was too quick. A housekeeper passing with flowers stopped for a moment, paled upon recognizing Elena, and quickly lowered her eyes. Isabel noticed the movement and smiled, thinking it was pity. It wasn't. Ryan noticed nothing. He only saw the scene Isabel had prepared for him, a wife without expression, a woman guilty of silence, a presence that needed to be removed before his new chapter could begin. Elena raised her eyes to Ryan. "You could have done this at home." Her voice came out firm but tired, carrying too many nights without explanation. Ryan clenched his jaw. For months, he had been accumulating small certainties against his own wife. Phone calls that ended when he walked in, trips she claimed were to visit a sick aunt in Joo Chiat, documents kept in a locked drawer, discreet meetings with men in suits at cafes near Raffles Place. Isabel had given a name to all these shadows: betrayal, self-interest, lies. Ryan, who commanded companies with spreadsheets, audits, and clauses, believed that a marriage could also be judged by evidence laid out on a table. "At home, you would have run," he said. "Here, there are witnesses. Here, it ends." Elena felt something inside her give way. Not exactly love, because love had been wounded for some time, but the childish hope that he would look at her one last time and ask for the truth before condemning her. Isabel picked up the pen and placed it before Elena with theatrical delicacy. "It's better for everyone. For you, too. Ryan has been generous, keeping up this farce for so long." A couple of Australian tourists stopped near the lift, whispering. A Singaporean executive pretended to look at his phone while filming on the sly. The head receptionist, Priya, reached for the internal phone but hesitated, as if she had received orders too old to be ignored and too dangerous to be carried out without authorization. Elena noticed. She also noticed the silver brooch on Priya's uniform, bearing the symbol of a small crown over 2 intertwined letters. The same symbol hidden on the inside of the old ring Elena wore on her little finger. Worn, discreet, almost invisible. Isabel pointed to the signature line. "Here, you don't need to read everything. You don't have much to negotiate." Elena let out a short, humorless laugh. "You talk as if you own the place." Isabel leaned in, fragrant and venomous. "Today, darling, I don't need to be the owner. It's enough that the owner is on my side." Ryan moved before Elena could respond. He took the pen and, in a gesture that seemed small to those watching but brutal to the one who felt it, placed it in her hand. His fingers wrapped around Elena's wrist with firmness. It didn't quite hurt her skin, but it crushed something deeper. "Sign it," he repeated. "You always wanted the freedom to live your lies. I'm giving it to you." Elena stared at his hand holding hers. She remembered another night, in a small HDB flat, before Ryan became a headline in business magazines, when he had held these same fingers and promised he would never let her face humiliation alone. Now, he was the humiliation. The pianist hit a wrong note. At the counter, Priya finally typed something into the system and sent a silent message. A security guard near the revolving door straightened his posture. The air in the lobby shifted, but only Elena understood why. Still, she didn't pull her hand away. She wanted to see how far Ryan would go when he believed she had nothing left. "Do you really think I came here for money?" Elena asked. Ryan let out a dry laugh. "I don't think anything anymore. I saw." Isabel opened her purse and took out a few photographs, spreading them over the papers. Elena in a cafe with the lawyer Suresh Kumar. Elena entering through a side door of this very hotel on a rainy afternoon. Elena hugging a gray-haired man in the car park of a law firm. The images looked intimate to someone who didn't know the context. Isabel only knew the part that interested her. "He suffered a lot before making this decision," she said, placing a hand on Ryan's arm. Elena looked at that hand and felt a pang of nausea, not just from jealousy, but from recognizing the precision of a well-executed trap. "Suresh Kumar is a lawyer," Elena said, "and the gray-haired man is called Uncle Jimmy." Ryan averted his eyes for half a second. Isabel seized the opportunity. "Of course, there's always an explanation. Always a man with a respectable name. A side door. A secret document. How convenient." An elderly lady waiting for her driver in the lounge stood up slowly, observing Elena with a strange, almost respectful expression. She had attended an opening in Sentosa years before and remembered a young woman in a black dress standing beside the founder of the Crown Holdings Group. She didn't remember the name, but she remembered the crown on the ring. Priya, the receptionist, could no longer hide her nervousness. The duty manager appeared from the administrative corridor. Pale, adjusting his suit jacket, he didn't walk towards Ryan, though everyone knew who Ryan Chow was. He walked towards Elena, stopped 3 steps away, and bowed his head slightly. Isabel frowned. "What are you doing? Handle this. This woman is causing embarrassment to important guests." The manager swallowed hard. "Miss Pereira, I must ask you to keep your voice down." Isabel's eyes widened, offended. "Do you know who you're talking to?" The manager looked at Elena before answering. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. That's why I'm asking for your consideration." Ryan released Elena's wrist, annoyed. "What is this theater?" The manager didn't answer. The private lift at the back of the lobby opened with an almost imperceptible chime, and out stepped Mr. David Chan, the general manager of the Orchard Crown Singapore. A man with silver hair, impeccable posture, and a reputation for never appearing in the lobby for common problems. Long-time guests recognized him immediately. Employees straightened their shoulders as if an invisible inspection was sweeping through the room. David Chan walked without haste, but each step seemed to close a door behind Isabel. Upon reaching the table, he didn't look at Ryan first, nor at Isabel, nor at the divorce papers. He looked at Elena. For an instant, something akin to sadness crossed his face. "Madame Tan," he said, his voice clear enough to cut through the marble. "Do you wish for me to intervene?" The silence that fell afterwards wasn't just silence, it was a plummet. Isabel laughed, incredulous. "Madame Tan, what is this familiarity?" Elena closed her fingers around the pen but didn't sign. For the first time that night, she stood up. She made no grand gesture, didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. She just stood, and the simple movement seemed to reorganize the lobby around her. Ryan stared at her as if seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. "Elena, answer me. What is happening?" She looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was crueler than any scream, because it no longer asked for help. "You wanted witnesses, Ryan. Now you have them." David Chan turned to the reception team. "Immediately suspend any reservation linked to Miss Pereira's private event until further notice. Contact the group's legal department and remove all unauthorized recordings from public areas." Isabel took a step forward. "You can't do that. Ryan is a strategic partner of this hotel." David Chan faced her with an almost lethal calm. "Partners are received with courtesy. People who embarrass the owner are invited to leave." The word owner pierced Ryan like a bloodless blade. He looked at Elena, then at the hotel, then at the employees who, one by one, no longer hid their deference. "Owner of what?" His voice was barely a whisper. David Chan answered before she could. "Of the Orchard Crown Singapore and the other properties of the Crown Holdings Group. Madame Elena Tan is the majority shareholder of the system since the corporate restructuring carried out by the founder, Mr. Thomas Lim." Isabel turned red, then white. "That's a lie. She lives in a normal condo. She wears dresses from blog shops. She has no security, no driver. She has nothing." Elena finally looked at Isabel. "I have one thing you never calculated." Isabel clutched her handbag. And what would that be? Elena placed the pen back on the folder, exactly on the line where they awaited her signature. Patience. Ryan took a step towards her but stopped, as if the ground he knew had vanished. The mobile phones were slowly lowered. The pianist stopped playing. Priya came out from behind the counter, carrying a small black box which she handed to David Chan. He opened it to reveal an old metallic card engraved with the same crown as Elena's ring. The executive access is now active, Madam Tan, as per your previous instructions. We await your confirmation before any public announcement. Ryan repeated, almost voiceless. Previous instructions? Elena felt the blow of his question, because there was the part he would never immediately understand. It wasn't theater for that night. It wasn't an improvised revenge. It was a truth kept for years. A legacy protected in silence. A promise made to a dead man who had taught her to never confuse wealth with character. She took the card but didn't look at it. She looked at Ryan. I didn't hide who I was to deceive you. I hid it to find out who would stay when they thought I had nothing. Isabel tried to laugh, but no convincing sound came out. Ryan ran a hand over his face, as if he could erase the last few hours. Elena, she interrupted him without raising her voice. No. Today, you will not turn my humiliation into your confusion. The general manager made a discreet gesture, and 2 security guards approached Isabel, maintaining a professional distance. Isabel backed away, furious. This isn't over. You think a purchased surname will erase what you are? Elena turned to her with a serenity that was more frightening than anger. I know exactly what I am. The question is, how long will you sustain what you pretended to be? Then, Elena took the divorce folder, closed it, and handed it to Ryan. Take your papers. When I decide to sign something, it won't be in a hotel lobby, nor at the hand of a mistress, nor under the pressure of a man who mistook silence for guilt. Ryan received the folder as if it weighed more than all the contracts of his life. Elena walked towards the private lift, accompanied by David Chan. As the entire lobby parted for her without her asking, every step hurt, but not one faltered. Inside was a shattered woman replaying the image of her husband's hand clamped on her wrist, the pen pressed between her fingers, the cold gaze that had pushed her out of a life she was still trying to save. Outside was the owner of the Crown Empire, crossing her own hotel, as if finally accepting the seat that had always been hers. Before the lift doors closed, Ryan called her name. Elena turned only her head. He seemed smaller under the chandeliers, not from losing power, but from finally realizing he had never had it over her. Why did you never tell me? He asked. Elena held his gaze until the last second. Because I wanted you to choose Elena before you chose any empire. The doors closed. In the golden reflection of the metal, Ryan saw not the end of a marriage, but the beginning of a truth that might just destroy him. The private lift ascended in silence, but inside Elena, everything was still making noise. The image of Ryan forcing the pen into her hand returned with a cruel clarity, as if the gesture had been seared into her skin. David Chan stood beside her, motionless, respectful, holding the metallic executive access card like a relic. Through the mirrored wall of the lift, Elena saw her own face, makeup intact, hair tied back, eyes too dry for a woman just humiliated by her husband in front of strangers. That was what hurt the most. She hadn't cried not because it didn't hurt, but because she had learned early on that some falls are only survived when no one has the privilege of watching you bleed. When the doors opened on the top floor, revealing the corridor reserved for presidential suites and the group's boardrooms, David Chan spoke carefully. Madam Tan, shall I have the hotel closed to press access? She took a deep breath. No. Closing doors now will only make it look like I'm hiding something. In the executive lounge, far from the marble and whispers of the lobby, Elena finally took the ring off her little finger and placed it on the table. The small crown engraved on the inside gleamed under the warm light. David Chan watched the gesture with an old sadness. He had known this woman since she was 20, when Thomas Lim, the group's founder, had introduced her as the daughter life had given him too late. Back then, Elena was a simple girl, raised between heartland bakeries, crowded MRT trains, and accounting textbooks paid for with sacrifice. Thomas had seen in her not just gratitude, but instinct, intelligence, and a rare ability to listen before deciding. Your father would have hated the scene today, David Chan said. Elena closed her eyes for a second. My father would have asked why I let it get so far. David Chan didn't reply, because it was true. Elena had hidden her own power to protect the corporate restructuring, to observe partners who feigned loyalty, and to prevent the group from becoming a pawn in the hands of opportunists. But she had also hidden it for love. And that was the part no report could explain. Down in the lobby, Ryan remained standing with the divorce folder in his hands, surrounded by a silence that was no longer respect, but curiosity. Isabel spoke quickly beside him, trying to stitch reality back together before it tore completely. "This is a setup, Ryan. You're not going to believe this act, are you? She planned it all. She let you go through this to look like the victim." Ryan stared at the closed lift door. He could still feel the memory of Elena's wrist in his palm, her slight resistance, the silent firmness with which she had not pleaded. A part of him wanted to run after her, demand explanations, reconstruct the facts. Another part, prouder and more wounded, clung to the question that hurt like an accusation. Why would his wife hide an entire empire from him? Isabel sensed the crack and slid her sweet voice into it. "You always found it strange, Ryan. The trips, the meetings, the documents. Now you know why. She had a whole life outside your marriage." Ryan turned slowly. "And you knew she was connected to the hotel." Isabel. She held his gaze for a fraction too long. "I suspected she knew someone here. Not this." The lie wasn't perfect, and Ryan noticed. For years, he had made his fortune reading pauses, hesitations, and omissions in boardrooms. The problem was that with Elena, he had chosen not to read. He had chosen to accept the easier narrative, perhaps because it cast him as the victim, and not as a man incapable of reaching his own wife. "You said she depended on me," he murmured. Isabel lifted her chin. "She wanted you to believe that. That's the con." Ryan clutched the folder. "What con?" "A marriage to you, access to your businesses, influence on your image. Now she reveals herself as a hotel owner in front of the whole world and turns you into the villain. Don't you see?" The explanation came too readily, fit too perfectly, as if Isabel had rehearsed it even before the truth emerged. Ryan took a step away from her. "I need to think." Isabel grabbed his arm, stronger than she intended. "Don't leave me alone here." He looked down at her hand and, for the first time that night, saw not affection, but possession. On the executive floor, Elena asked for a strong coffee, no sugar, a kopi or kosong, and a list of all internal access logs for the last 48 hours. Priya, the receptionist, came up minutes later, nervous, clutching a tablet to her chest. As she entered, she almost apologized before speaking. Elena softened her voice. "You did the right thing," alerting Mr. Chan. Priya swallowed her emotion. "I recognized your ring, madam. Mr. Lim hired me when I was still an intern. He told us that if the crown ever returned to the lobby, we were to look twice before obeying any important guest." Elena felt a lump in her throat but just nodded. There was love even in the orders Thomas had left scattered throughout his hotel. David Chan placed the tablet on the table. The cameras showed Isabel entering hours earlier through a side door, accompanied by an events consultant not on the official list. They also showed a brief conversation with the duty manager and, worse, a digital authorization issued by someone above the operational level. Elena enlarged the screen. "Who cleared this?" David Chan's face was grim. The access came from Chung Wai-moon's office. The name made the room feel colder. Chung Wai-moon was a long-standing board member, the kind who smiled little, remembered much, and never signed anything without calculating the advantage. During Thomas's life, he had been useful. After the founder's death, he had become patient. Elena had always been suspicious of his patience. "Did Mr. Cheong know Isabel was coming?" Priya asked, forgetting her rank for a moment. David Chan replied, "Worse. Someone from his office booked the lounge space under the guise of a high-level private discussion." Elena tapped the edge of the table with her fingers. The trap wasn't just marital. Isabel hadn't chosen the orchard crown out of irony or vanity. She had chosen the lobby because someone wanted to force the public exposure of the majority shareholder before the right moment. If Elena had accepted the humiliation, she would appear weak. If she fought back, she would seem vengeful. If her identity was revealed amidst a scandal, the board would have reason to question her capacity for emotional governance. "They wanted to drag me out of the shadows with blood on my face," Elena said. David Chan bowed his head, and they almost succeeded. Meanwhile, in the hotel's basement car park, Isabel got into the car with Ryan, but couldn't maintain her mask for long. "You need to make a statement before she does. Social media will turn you into a monster." Ryan rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the grey concrete. "I was one." Isabel fell silent. His statement wasn't a question, it was a fact that irritated her. "You were deceived." Ryan looked up. "I was." She moved closer, trying to reclaim her sweetness. "My love, Elena manipulated everyone. Even those employees seemed trained to worship her." The driver pretended not to listen, but every word hung heavy in the enclosed air. Ryan remembered a pale Priya, the manager urging caution. David Chan asking Elena if she wanted him to intervene or continue observing. It wasn't improvised, not a dramatic stunt. It was an entire structure responding to an authority he had never imagined existed. And the question returned, unbearable. At what point had he stopped knowing the woman who slept beside him? Isabel, for her part, was already thinking ahead. When Ryan asked to be dropped off alone at his apartment, she agreed with a quick kiss on the cheek, but got into another car as soon as he went up. Inside the vehicle, she took a second phone from her purse and sent a short message. She's revealed herself. We need to spin the story before morning. The reply was almost immediate. Use adoption, inheritance, emotional fraud. Don't mention my name. Isabel smiled without joy. For years, she had heard her mother repeat that the Lims had destroyed her father, that Thomas Lim had stolen from a brilliant man the right to lead the group he had helped build. Isabel had grown up with this version of events like a prayer. Getting close to Ryan had been simple at first, almost a game. Praise his vision, feed his doubts, always appear where Elena was absent. But the scene in the lobby had given her something better than jealousy. It had provided a public image, a secret wife, a hidden fortune, a humiliated husband. With the right words, the country would hate Elena. Before midnight, the first comments began to circulate. A shaky video showed only Ryan holding Elena's hand with Isabel beside the papers. Another, conveniently cut, showed David Chan calling Elena owner. Anonymous accounts began to suggest that a hidden heiress had married a CEO to expand her influence, that Thomas Lim had transferred his assets to a young woman with no family bloodline, that group employees were forced to treat her like royalty. In the executive lounge, Elena read the first digital headlines, still unconfirmed, and felt the old nausea of public injustice. Marina, indignant, said the hotel could release the full video. David Chan considered that this would also expose Ryan completely. Elena remained silent. The wounded part of her wanted everyone to see every second, every word, every cruelty. The part that had once loved Ryan hesitated to hand his downfall to the voracity of strangers. We won't publish anything tonight, she decided, but preserve all the files, uncut, unedited, no spectacle. David Chan waited for Priya to leave before saying what truly worried him. Madam Tan, Mr. Chung has called an extraordinary board meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Elena let out a low laugh. Fast, too fast. The stated agenda is institutional stability following the public exposure of the majority shareholder. She walked to the window. Down below, Singapore glittered indifferently, with its busy roads, its lit windows, its secrets stacked in glass towers. The hotel that bore her adoptive family's name seemed more than just an asset. It was a promise. Thomas hadn't just left her rooms, restaurants, and contracts. He had left employees, histories, suppliers, entire families dependent on decisions made in rooms like this one. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold glass. They think my silence was fear. David Chan moved closer. And what was it? She answered without turning. It was discipline, until today. The general manager understood the limit in that phrase. The woman who had accepted being underestimated for love, strategy, and grief had just lost her last reason to remain small. In Ryan's apartment, the night brought no rest. He opened the divorce folder on the living room table and saw Elena's absent signature like an accusation. Then, he picked up his phone and looked at the photographs Isabel had sent him weeks before. He enlarged the image of Elena with Suresh Kumar at the cafe. For the first time, he noticed a folder with the Crown Holdings crest on the table, half hidden by the reflection in the glass. In the photo from the law firm, the gray-haired man Elena was hugging wore a brooch identical to the ones worn by the hotel staff. Uncle Jimmy. Ryan repeated the name under his breath, trying to remember where he'd heard it. Then he found an old email from Elena, sent months before, which he had never opened because he was on a trip with Isabel. The subject line just said, "Need to tell you something before the AGM." Ryan's stomach sank. He clicked. The body of the email was short, almost pained. She said there were truths about the Lim family, about the inheritance, and about her position in the group that needed to be said in person, because he deserved to hear it from her before anyone else. He never replied. The next morning, Elena entered the boardroom, wearing a dark blue suit, with no jewelry apart from the old ring, now back on her finger. She didn't look like a woman at war, and perhaps that was why everyone was more unsettled. Cheong Wai Mun was at the opposite head of the table, white hair combed back, with the smile of a man who had prepared condolences before the funeral. Around the table, board members, In-house lawyers and directors avoided looking directly at her. David Chan stood by the door, not as a shield, but as a witness. Cheong opened the meeting with a gentle voice. Elena, we deeply regret the personal episode, but the exposure of your connection to the group, combined with the unclear circumstances of your succession, requires immediate transparency. She sat down without being asked. Transparency is an excellent word, Mr. Cheong. Let's use it for everything. He narrowed his eyes. Including explaining why you concealed your identity from strategic partners? Elena placed a red folder on the table, including explaining why your office authorized Isabel Pereira to stage a scene in the lobby of my hotel. The air shifted. Some board members stirred in their chairs. Cheong didn't lose his smile, but his fingers tightened on his pen. Be careful with accusations. Elena opened the folder and distributed copies of the access logs. I am being. The phrase was quiet, but no one interrupted her. Before Cheong could respond, one of the director's phones buzzed, then another, and another. A new article had just been posted on dozens of profiles simultaneously. Elena Tan, the bloodless heiress, allegedly manipulated an ailing Thomas Lim in his final months to seize control of the Crown Holdings Group. The story was accompanied by an old photo of her beside the founder, with a caption that suggested more than it said. Elena read the headline on the tablet David Chan handed her and felt the pain strike a different place, deeper than pride. They weren't just attacking her position, they were attacking the man who had welcomed her as a daughter. Cheong feigned surprise with insufficient perfection. It seems, madam, you will have a lot to clarify. Elena closed the tablet slowly. I will, and we'll start with the man who introduced Isabel Pereira to you. Across the city, Ryan also saw the article. The phrase bloodless heiress flashed on the screen like a cowardly cruelty. He remembered Elena saying she wanted to be chosen before any empire, and for the first time, the memory didn't sound like a defense, but like a farewell. Without thinking, he grabbed his car keys. Isabel called twice. He declined. The third time, he answered on speakerphone, already in the lift. Ryan, don't go to her. It's exactly what Elena wants. He stared at his own reflection in the metal doors. What does she want, Isabel? The pause on the other end was minimal, but it was there. To destroy you before you destroy her version of events. Ryan walked out into the car park, his chest tight. Funny, you sound like you've already written tomorrow's headline. Isabel went silent. Ryan hung up. As he got into his car, he still didn't know if he was going to ask for forgiveness, demand answers, or face his own shame. He only knew that for the first time in months, the doubt was no longer directed at Elena. The boardroom of the Crown Holdings Group had never seemed so confining. The light wood-paneled walls, the blank screens, and the long glass table gave the room an elegance that, on that morning, felt like a disguise for a tribunal. Helena remained seated across from Cheong Wai-mun. The red folder opened before her, and the tablet turned off beside it, as if refusing to let headlines drive the meeting. She could feel their eyes calculating her breathing, her posture, any tremor that could serve as proof of imbalance. Cheong, with the soft voice of someone hiding a blade in cotton, repeated that the group's institutional stability demanded an immediate review of the majority shareholders' powers. Elena listened to it all without interruption, until he insinuated that Thomas Lim had been emotionally vulnerable in his final years. Then she raised her eyes. Be careful, Mr. Cheong. Questioning my competence is one thing. Using a dead man's grief to erase his will is another. The sentence wasn't loud, but it traveled across the table like a slamming door. Cheong breathed through his nose, maintaining his facade of a smile. No one here wants to disrespect Thomas's memory, but it is our duty to understand how a young woman with no blood ties took majority control of a structure of this size. Elena felt the phrase "no blood ties" repeat inside her, not as a novelty, but as an old wound being reopened in public. No blood ties, she repeated slowly. It's curious how men who have spent decades turning affection into contracts only remember blood when they want to invalidate a woman. Some board members looked down, others pretended to examine documents. Cheong leaned forward. So you confirm that you are not the founder's biological daughter? Elena held his gaze. I confirm what I never denied to anyone who had the decency to ask. Thomas Lim did not father me. He chose me, raised me as his daughter in his final years, prepared me, tested me, and left everything recorded with lucidity, witnesses, and legal oversight. David Chan, near the door, watched in silence, but his eyes said that every word had been long awaited. It was at that moment that Ryan entered. Not with the authority he usually carried into boardrooms, but with the urgency of someone who had arrived too late to a truth that belonged to him. The door opened, and everyone turned. He was without a tie, his face marked by a sleepless night, the divorce folder in one hand. Elena showed no surprise, but the pressure in her chest shifted. The heart recognizes footsteps before pride can reject them. Chong smiled to one side, as if the arrival were useful. Mr. Chow, this is a private meeting. Ryan looked at Elena, waiting for some sign, some permission. She gave none. I came to return something that should never have existed, he said, placing the folder on the table, but not pushing it towards her. And I came to hear what I refused to hear before. Elena didn't respond. Chung seized the opening. Perhaps, sir, you can confirm that Madame Tan kept relevant information hidden during your marriage? Ryan stood motionless. The easy answer was yes. The honest answer was a disgrace. I can confirm that I didn't ask the right way, he said. The silence that followed was broken at 9:16 a.m. As the tense meeting resumed, every mobile phone vibrated almost simultaneously. A live stream from a corporate gossip portal began circulating with a headline that Chong pretended to read for the first time: the adopted heiress who fooled a CEO and seized an empire. On screen, Isabel appeared in a high-end salon at Ion Orchard, her eyes moist and her voice perfectly broken. She said she didn't want to expose anyone but couldn't stand by and watch an honorable man be humiliated by a woman who had feigned simplicity while hiding a fortune. She said Elena had approached Ryan strategically, that Thomas Lim had been convinced by guilt and loneliness to alter his succession, and that old partners had been erased from the story. She didn't name Chong. She didn't have to. The words were arrows without a signature. Elena watched a few seconds before turning off the screen. She knows how to choose a stage, she murmured. Ryan clenched his fists. I gave her everything she needed for this. The admission was his, but she couldn't afford to fall into it at that moment. Chong placed his hands on the table. It's regrettable that private matters have ended up in the press. For this very reason, I propose Elena's temporary removal from strategic management until the legitimacy of the succession is clarified. David Chan took a step forward, but Elena raised a hand to stop him. You're not proposing removal to protect the group. You're proposing it because you know that as long as I'm in this chair, certain files will be reviewed. Chong finally let his smile die. Files? Elena opened another folder, this time with old copies of minutes, shareholding agreements, and records of a failed attempt to sell group assets. My father left instructions for me to reopen documents from 17 years ago. Should any board member try to use my adoption as a weapon? Chong paled just enough for those who knew how to read guilt. Ryan saw it. Elena did too. An older board member, Mr. Norden, took a deep breath and asked to see the documents. Elena pushed them across the glass. Let's start with the name Orlando Pereira. Upon hearing the surname, Ryan turned his face to her. Pereira? Elena nodded without taking her eyes off Cheong, Isabel's father. The revelation landed on the table with physical weight. Until then, Isabel was seen as an ambitious, opportunistic, perhaps manipulative mistress. Suddenly, her presence in the lobby gained deeper roots. David Chan added in a controlled voice that Orlando Pereira had been a minority investor associated with the early expansion of the Crown Holdings Group, a charismatic, aggressive man, great at convincing banks and terrible at respecting boundaries. For years, he had presented himself as the forgotten founder, but the records showed something else. He had tried to leverage group assets without approval and negotiated a partial sale to a foreign fund. When Thomas blocked the deal, he accused the Lim family of betrayal. Cheong interrupted. That is one version. Elena opened a final sheet. No, this is the minutes you signed, confirming the irregularity of Orlando's operation and recommending his removal. Cheong's hand froze on the table. For an instant, his past ceased to be theory and gained ink. Ryan's throat went dry. Every piece he had ignored was starting to fit together in a cruel way. Isabel hadn't appeared in his life by chance at a business conference in Marina Bay Sands. It hadn't been a coincidence that she knew old names in the hotel sector, nor her excessive interest in the contracts between Chow Investments and Crown Holdings suppliers. He had mistaken availability for sincerity, staged fragility for trust, desire for refuge. And worse, he had delivered the weapon into Elena's hand. You knew? He asked Cheong before he could stop himself. The board member arched his eyebrows. Knew what? Who Isabel was. You knew why she approached me. Cheong leaned back in his chair. Mr. Chow, it's not my place to investigate your romantic choices. The response drew a discreet murmur. But it was your office's place to authorize the scene in the lobby, Ryan shot back. Elena finally looked at him, and her gaze held something worse than anger. A sad confirmation that he was beginning to understand far too late. The meeting was interrupted when an assistant entered, almost breathless, to announce that reporters were in front of the hotel and that Isabel's broadcast had reached thousands of views in minutes. The board dissolved into voices talking about reputation, official response, legal risk, and impact on bookings and partners. Elena closed her eyes for a second, not from weakness, but to command the storm. When she opened them, she spoke firmly. The group will not respond to gossip with spectacle. We will issue a statement informing that the succession was conducted within valid legal frameworks and that any accusation will be handled through the proper channels. Internally, an independent audit will review access granted to third parties and the involvement of Mr. Cheong's office in the lobby booking. Cheong slammed his hand on the table. This is an abuse of power. Elena tilted her head. No, Mr. Cheong. Abuse was using the pain of my marriage as a corporate governance tool. The sentence hit Ryan with unbearable precision. He wasn't just a husband who had erred. He was part of an operation that had tried to bring her down. After the meeting, Elena retreated to Thomas's old office, a room that still preserved the scent of leather, coffee, and polished wood. She asked that no one enter, but Ryan followed her to the door before David Chan could stop him. Elena, please. She paused without turning. You lost the right to ask for open doors with that voice. He took the blow because he deserved it. I found your email, the one before the AGM. You tried to tell me. She let out a small, sad laugh that seemed to break in the air. I tried many things, Ryan. I tried to talk. I tried to wait. I tried to believe that the man sleeping next to me still saw me without needing proof notarized by a lawyer. He lowered his head. I was a coward. Elena turned then. No. Cowardice would have been not knowing what to do. You knew. You chose to believe the woman who fed your vanity because it was easier than facing a wife who had her own life, her own secrets, and perhaps a power that didn't run through you. Ryan received every word without defense. The divorce folder was still in his hand, now looking ridiculous. Inside the office, Elena opened the central drawer and took out an envelope Thomas had given her before he died, with instructions to only open it if the name Orlando Pereira ever threatened the group again. She had never had the courage. That morning, with Ryan still standing at the door, she tore the seal. Inside were letters, copies of contracts, and an old photograph of Thomas with Orlando and a young woman in a green dress by the pool of their first hotel in Changi. On the back, a handwritten sentence said that every blood debt would charge interest in the future. Elena frowned. Alongside the photo was an old certificate and a letter from Thomas, confessing something he had never been able to fully prove. Orlando had used an extramarital affair and a child born out of wedlock as blackmail against partners and his own family, trying to turn guilt into equity. Elena felt the floor shift. Isabel might be Orlando's daughter, but she might also be the product of a story far dirtier than inherited vengeance. Ryan noticed the change in her face. What is it? Elena held the letter with stiff fingers. My father knew this would come back. He just didn't tell me it would come back with the face of your mistress. Before they could say more, David Chan entered without knocking, a gesture he would never make if the situation weren't grave. Madam Tan, Isabel, is at the hotel entrance with reporters. She says she won't leave until she's spoken with you. Elena looked out the window. Down below, cameras were swarming like insects around a light. Ryan took a step. I'll talk to her. Elena turned with a coldness. No. You already spoke for me yesterday when you put a pen in my hand. He recoiled as if struck. David Chan awaited her decision. Elena put Thomas's letter back in the folder and replaced the ring on her finger with an almost solemn calm. She knew that going down meant surrendering her image to the crowd. She knew that not going down would allow Isabel to keep writing the narrative. For the first time in years, strategy and pain wanted the same thing, to step out of the shadow. Prepare the hotel's press room, she said. No screaming in the lobby, no circus on the pavement. If Isabel wants to talk about inheritance, let's talk where everyone can hear the whole truth. David Chan nodded. Ryan looked at her with a mixture of pride and loss. Elena gave him nothing back but an order. And you are staying here. I don't need to be saved from the fire you helped start. The press room at the Orchard Crown Singapore had been designed for discreet launches, expansion announcements, and charity dinners, not for a war of inheritances disguised as a marital scandal. Yet, in less than 20 minutes, chairs were aligned, cameras were set up at the back, and the soft lighting revealed faces too tense for any ordinary corporate event. Elena entered accompanied by David Chan, unhurried, wearing the same dark blue suit from the board meeting and the old ring on her finger. There was no theatricality in her steps, but there was resolve, and that was enough to silence some of the murmurs. At the other side of the room, Isabel Pereira was already seated, flanked by 2 makeshift assistants and surrounded by eager journalists, as if she were a victim, summoned to depose an illegitimate queen. When she saw Elena, her smile faltered for an instant, but quickly returned, harder this time. Ryan remained at the back, near the door, because Elena had ordered him to stay, and it was the first of her orders he felt he had no right to disobey. Isabel spoke first, without waiting for permission. "I just want Singapore to understand that this woman is not the poor victim she pretended to be yesterday. She deceived my partner, she deceived employees, and she inherited an entire group with no limb blood in her veins." Some cameras turned to Elena, expecting emotion, indignation, perhaps an impulsive soundbite for social media. Elena simply placed Thomas's folder on the table and rested her hands beside it. "You use the word blood as if it's a legal document, Isabel. But when blood is used to buy silence, it just becomes a stain." The room stirred. Isabel narrowed her eyes. "Be careful what you insinuate." Elena replied calmly, "I'm not going to insinuate. I'm going to organize facts." David Chan distributed summarized copies of the old minutes, without exposing any private data beyond what was necessary. Elena explained that Thomas Lim had legally adopted her, that the succession had been prepared with legal and administrative oversight, and that her identity had been preserved to prevent attacks during the transition. She didn't ask for pity, didn't apologize for her existence, she simply returned her story to its proper place. Isabel tried to interrupt, but Elena took out the old photograph found in Thomas's envelope and placed it in front of her. The image of Orlando Pereira beside the founder seemed to drain the color from Isabel's face. "Do you recognize your father?" Elena said. It wasn't a question. Isabel lifted her chin, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. "I recognize a man who was betrayed by Thomas Lim." Elena tilted her head. "Is that what they told you?" For a second, Isabel's composure cracked, and the woman who had worn a champagne dress to humiliate another in the lobby gave way to a girl raised on a story, repeated until it became faith. "My father helped build this group. He was thrown out, erased, treated like a thief while Thomas kept everything." Elena glanced at David Chan, and he projected a sequence of carefully selected internal documents from nearly 2 decades prior onto the screen. There was no excessive technical jargon, just the essentials: contested authorizations, guarantees offered without approval, and the attempt to leverage group assets in a side deal. Orlando's fall hadn't been a theft, it had been a consequence. The revelation didn't destroy Isabel immediately. On the contrary, it ignited a more desperate anger in her. She stood up. "These documents were written by the winners. My father died saying that Thomas ruined him." Elena felt a pang of compassion she hated feeling, because Isabel had wounded her marriage, her image, and the memory of her adoptive father. But still, there was genuine pain in that voice. "Your father may have believed his own version," Elena said, "but there's something he never told you." The room grew smaller. Ryan took an involuntary step forward. Elena took another sheet from the folder. Thomas's letter. Her voice lost its corporate chill for an instant. "Orlando used debts, an affair, and the existence of a daughter to pressure partners. He made you an argument before you were old enough to understand what a company was." Isabel blinked as if she'd been slapped without contact. "Lies." Elena didn't press. "I wish they were. Because if they were lies, you would have at least inherited a clean cause. But you inherited a wound that other men kept open to use you." Cheong Wai-mun, who had been watching from the side of the room, feigning neutrality, realized too late that the sentence reached him. A journalist recognized him and asked if he confirmed his participation in the minutes that removed Orlando Pereira. Cheong tried to respond with superiority. "This is not the appropriate forum to discuss old corporate documents." Elena turned to him, curious. "The lobby wasn't the appropriate forum for my divorce either. But your office opened the door." The blow was precise. David Chan then displayed the access logs for the lounge booking, the special authorization, the time Isabel entered through a restricted area, all linked to Cheong's office. There was no theatrical accusation, just a line of events that closed like a chain. Isabel looked at Cheong, and for the first time, fear appeared without makeup. "You said she would never have the courage to reveal herself." Cheong froze. The sentence had escaped like glass shattering on the floor. The entire room heard it. Ryan closed his eyes for a second. Not from surprise, but from shame. The trap had a signature, and he had been the hand that held the pen. Isabel tried to regain ground by attacking Ryan. "Don't look at me like that. You wanted to believe it. You needed Elena to be guilty so you wouldn't feel small next to her." Ryan didn't deny it. He walked forward until he was just a few feet from the 2 women. but spoke while looking at Elena. It's true. The entire room turned to him. The confession didn't seem prepared. It was ugly, simple, and for that reason, harder to clip into a headline. I accepted half-truths because they protected my pride. When Isabel showed me photos, messages, and meetings, I didn't want to ask Elena. I wanted to condemn her. Yesterday, in the lobby, I forced her to hold a pen she should never have touched. Isabel laughed with bitterness. Now you're going to play the repentant husband because she owns the hotel. Ryan finally looked at Isabel without desire, without explosive anger, just with a lucidity that made her even more furious. No, I repent because she was my wife before I knew about any empire. And that's exactly where I failed. Elena listened without moving. A tired, human part of her wanted to cry hearing that. Another, more wounded part, remembered that words could arrive too late to be a shelter. Chong tried to end the exposure, saying the group should resolve everything internally, and that any old documentation required forensic analysis. Elena agreed unexpectedly. Yes, there will be an independent audit, a review of access logs, and a formal record of every attempt to manipulate the group's image and my personal life to contest control. Cheong seemed relieved for a second, until she finished. And until that is concluded, you will recuse yourself from any deliberations related to the governance of Crown Holdings. If you refuse, I will invoke the other instruments provided in our internal agreements and submit everything to the appropriate committee. She didn't invent a threat, didn't promise legal action, didn't make a spectacle. She just made it clear that the time for courtesy was over. Cheong realized the game had changed because she wasn't reacting like a victim. She was leading like an owner. Isabel, however, couldn't bear to lose the center of the narrative. She approached the table and picked up her father's photograph, her eyes shining not with calculation anymore, but with helplessness. You talk as if it's easy to abandon the only story I had of him. Elena softened her voice. It isn't easy. But using your pain to destroy another woman doesn't make your father innocent either. Isabel clutched the photo to her chest. My mother died saying the limbs owed us everything. Elena took a deep breath. Perhaps your mother was also hurt by men who promised more than they could deliver. That doesn't give Mr. Cheong the right to turn you into a weapon, nor does it give you the right to turn my marriage into a stage. The sentence touched something Isabel didn't want to feel. For a moment, she seemed smaller, almost lost. But then she saw the cameras, saw Ryan far from her, saw Cheong avoiding her eyes, and she chose her most familiar defense. I'm not going down alone, she said softly, but the microphone caught it. Cheong tried to leave discreetly, but David Chan had already instructed hotel security to log his departure without confrontation. Ryan intercepted his path with just his body, without touching him. Who edited Elena's photos? He asked. Cheong raised an eyebrow. Get out of my way. Ryan didn't move. I saw the original files this morning. There was metadata erased from the images Isabel sent me. You had access to the same documents that tried to link Elena to fraud. Cheong smiled, but the smile was cracked. You should be worried about your own divorce, Mr. Chow, Ryan replied in a low voice. I am. That's why I'm going to start by telling the truth. Elena heard, but did not interfere. Ryan took out his phone and, in front of the journalists, sent a simple statement to his PR team, admitting that he had subjected Elena to an unjust public situation, that he had been induced by incomplete information, and that he would cooperate with the audit to clarify the manipulation. Isabel looked at him as if it were a betrayal. Elena looked at him as someone seeing, finally, not a savior, but a man accepting the consequences. When the room began to disperse into questions, David Chan led Elena to the reserved corridor. Ryan followed, keeping his distance. Only when they were far from the cameras, between the press room door and the private lift, did Elena allow exhaustion to show in her shoulders. Ryan noticed and didn't try to touch her. I made the statement, he said, almost as if handing over something useless in the face of a ruin. Elena looked at him. You did the minimum that the truth required. He accepted that. I know. The corridor was silent, but all of Singapore seemed to press against the hotel walls. Elena held Thomas's folder tightly. Tomorrow, there's a shareholders' meeting. Mr. Chong will try to survive politically. Isabel might name names or invent new attacks. And you? She paused. Ryan waited. Elena took the divorce papers he had left in the boardroom from her folder and placed them in his hands. Yesterday, you wanted me to sign this to leave your life with dignity. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, it will be your turn to prove if you have any. Ryan looked down at the papers. When he looked up, she was already getting into the lift. Before the doors closed, Elena said only, choose without an audience this time, Ryan, but own it in front of one. The extraordinary general meeting of the Crown Holdings Group began at 10 a.m. in the hotel's grand ballroom, the same building where, 2 days earlier, Elena had been treated as an intruder before a divorce folder. Now, the room was arranged without excessive luxury, with shareholders, directors, legal representatives, independent auditors, and long-serving employees seated in silent rows. Elena entered last, accompanied by David Chan, but not hiding behind him. She wore white, not as a symbol of innocence, but of clarity. At the back, Ryan remained standing with the divorce folder in his hands, because she had asked him to come not as a husband or a strategic ally, but as a witness to the damage he had helped cause. Isabel was further to the left, without assistance, without a triumphal dress, her face pale, and the photograph of Orlando Pereira clutched to her body. Chung Wai-moon occupied a chair away from the main table, surrounded by a loneliness no old family name could disguise. When Elena sat down, no one questioned her authority to open the session. Everyone already knew. Elena began without raising her voice. For years, my silence was mistaken for weakness, convenience, or cold calculation. Today, I will end it without turning pain into a spectacle. She explained objectively that Thomas Lim had legally adopted her, prepared her succession in stages, and created mechanisms to protect the group while old disputes were investigated. She didn't mention unnecessary intimate details, didn't display the poverty she came from as a trophy, didn't ask for applause for having survived. She just shared that Thomas had chosen her because he saw in her discipline, memory, and a commitment to people whom many shareholders saw only as payroll expenses. Next, David Chan presented the preliminary audit reports. Isabel's access to the hotel had been facilitated by an authorization linked to Chung's office. The lobby videos had been clipped by hired social media accounts to inflate the public narrative, and documents used to cast suspicion on Elena originated from files manipulated by external intermediaries. The assembly received each piece of data, like hearing a wall crack. Chung tried to defend himself with old phrases, speaking of an internal witch hunt, misinterpretation, and institutional zeal. Elena let him finish. Then she opened Thomas's folder and placed on the table the minutes he had signed years before, when he had recommended Orlando Pereira's removal for irregular operations. "You knew Isabel's version was incomplete," she said. "Even so, you chose to feed it, because a wounded daughter was more useful than an informed shareholder." Chung lost his air of offense. He didn't confess everything, but he also couldn't find the dignity to deny it firmly. One of the auditors announced that further internal procedures would be opened, and the other board members approved his recusal from governance-related deliberations, pending the conclusion of the inquiries. There were no shouts, no dramatic arrest, no prolonged public humiliation. There was something heavier, the slow withdrawal of a man who for years had considered himself indispensable. As Chung left, he looked at Elena with resentment. She didn't look away. "My father was right about you," was all she said. Chung responded with silence, and that silence sounded like defeat. Isabel was called to speak next. For a few seconds, no one knew if she would refuse, attack, or flee. She stood up with Orlando's photograph in her hands and walked to the table as if crossing a burnt bridge. "My father left me a story," she began, her voice trembling. "My mother repeated that story until she died. I grew up believing the Lims had stolen everything from us. When Mr. Chung approached me, he didn't need to invent my hatred. He just had to point me where to aim it." She looked at Ryan, and the anger in her eyes no longer had the gleam of possession, but of wounded shame. "I used you because you wanted to be used. You wanted someone to tell you your wife was small, fake, and ungrateful. I said it. You believed it." Ryan didn't flinch. Elena didn't protect him either. Isabel then turned to her. "But I did worse to you. I wanted you to feel the way my mother felt, disposable, invisible, without the right to enter through the front door." The ballroom remained quiet. Isabel swallowed hard. That wasn't justice. It was a rotten inheritance. Elena watched the woman who had hurt her and realized that victory didn't taste as she had imagined. There was no pleasure in seeing Isabel break. There was only the hard relief of stopping her pain from contaminating other lives. "You will be held accountable for what you did," Elena said. "But I will not turn your fall into a show. The group will sever any ties with you and with companies associated with the defamation campaign. As for your father, the archives will be made available so you can know the whole story, not the version they used against both of us." Isabel closed her eyes, and a tear fell before she could hide it. "You don't hate me?" Elena took a long time to answer. "I hate what you did. I'm not going to carry you inside me for the rest of my life." Isabel felt that sentence as more of a punishment than forgiveness. As she left the ballroom, she wasn't escorted out like a soap opera villain, but walked slowly, smaller, forced to carry a truth that no longer fit into vengeance. When it was Ryan's turn, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He walked to the front without the confidence of the CEO, who signed multi-million-dollar contracts, holding the divorce folder like an indictment against himself. He stopped before Elena but spoke to everyone. "I subjected my wife to a public violence that no justification can make acceptable. I was induced by false information, but that does not absolve me, because I chose to believe it before asking for the truth. I used my position, my pride, and my coldness to try and force a signature from a woman I had promised to protect. I apologize to Elena Tan, to the hotel employees who witnessed that scene, and to the Crown Holdings Group, whose image was used because of my blindness." He opened the folder and took out the papers. "Yesterday, Elena told me to choose without an audience, but to own it in front of one. I have chosen not to demand anything more from her. If she wants the divorce, I will sign it without conditions. If she only wants distance, I will accept it. My regret does not buy reconciliation." Elena felt the ballroom disappear for a moment. In front of her was not the man who had grabbed her wrist, nor the ambitious young man who had once shared a kaya toast with her in their small kitchen while planning the future. They were both there, mixed, broken, impossible to separate with the ease that resentment would have liked. She stood up, took the papers, and read the first page. The pen David Chan placed beside it was simple, black, with no ceremonial shine. Elena smiled sadly, noticing the difference. "That night, you put a pen in my hand to end my dignity. Today, I am picking one up of my own free will to reclaim my choice." Ryan closed his eyes, accepting the blow. Elena signed only an initial form for consensual separation, not as a final decree, but as a boundary. Then she looked up. "Our marriage doesn't end here because of Isabel, or Mr. Chung, or my surname. It ends because when I needed to be heard, you chose to judge me. The future won't be decided today, but it won't begin while you still confuse regret with the right to return." Ryan nodded, and the pain on his face asked for no reward. "I will wait without asking you to wait for me." Elena almost smiled, but didn't. "Don't wait. Change. If our paths ever cross again, let it be between two whole people, not between guilt and longing." The sentence closed something no contract could ever name. The meeting proceeded with formal decisions. The affirmation of Elena as majority shareholder, the creation of an independent historical review committee, new access rules for restricted areas, institutional protection for the employees who had acted correctly in the lobby, and a sober public statement without personal attacks. Priya, sitting at the back, cried discreetly when Elena thanked the staff who recognized the crown not as a symbol of luxury, but of responsibility. David Chan, for his part, lowered his eyes to hide his emotion. Thomas Lim was not there, but his absence finally felt less like a wound and more like a legacy. Months later, the Orchard Crown Singapore was no longer remembered just for the lobby scandal, but for the governance turnaround that strengthened the group. Elena publicly assumed the role of chairwoman and launched an internal training program for employees from lower-income backgrounds, saying at the ceremony that talent without opportunity was a door locked from the inside. Isabel left Singapore for a time, not to flee responsibility, but to reconstruct her own history, without Chong, without Ryan, and without the romanticized shadow of Orlando. She sent Elena a short letter, not asking for friendship, but simply acknowledging that she had confused memory with truth. Elena kept the letter in a drawer, not out of tenderness, but because some wars only end when we stop feeding the fire. Chung lost influence, allies, and the comfort of being feared. He didn't disappear from the world, because people like him rarely do, but he ceased to occupy places where his venomous patience decided the fate of others. Ryan returned to the hotel only once, on a rainy afternoon, with no press, no flowers, no Isabel, no folder. He found Elena in Thomas's old office, reviewing expansion projects for the region. He asked for permission before entering, and that small gesture said more than old speeches. They talked for almost an hour, about practical matters, then about the condo where they had been happy, then about the night that could never be erased. Ryan didn't ask her to come back. Elena didn't offer complete forgiveness, but when he said goodbye, she walked him to the private lift. The doors opened for a second. The two saw their reflections side by side in the golden metal, just like that night, but with no screams, no imposed papers, no audience. "Are you okay?" he asked. Elena looked down at the lobby below, where guests were arriving. Employees were smiling, and no one seemed to know how many truths had bled on that marble. "I'm learning to be," she answered, "in my name, in my place, in my life." Ryan nodded and stepped into the lift. When the doors closed, Elena didn't feel abandoned. She felt space. That evening, before leaving the hotel, she walked slowly through the lobby. Priya was at the reception, the pianist was playing a soft melody, and the orchids had been replaced with yellow ginger flowers. Elena stopped before the blue armchair where she had almost signed away her own existence, and lightly touched its velvet back. There was no hatred there now. There was memory. She didn't need to destroy that scene to overcome it. She just needed to know that she would never again sit anywhere waiting for someone else to give her back her dignity. David Chan appeared beside her with his usual discretion. "Madam Tan, the car is ready," she smiled. "I'm walking to the Kopitiam on the corner tonight, David." He looked surprised, then he understood. Elena walked through the revolving doors without security, without a husband, without a mistress lurking, without hiding her ring. Outside, Singapore was still noisy, imperfect, and alive. And Elena Tan, owner of her own name, walked into the city as someone who finally had nothing to prove to anyone.